The crowd went silent the moment Officer Daniel stepped forward. In front of him, 6 retired police dogs, once heroes of the city, sat locked inside metal cages, trembling. Tears streamed from their eyes, as if they understood exactly what was about to happen. A giant wooden sign behind them read, "Auction today." No names, no honor, just a sale. Their old police collars still hung around their necks. Some had scars. Some could barely stand. But every one of them believed the same thing, that their handler would come back. Officer Daniel froze when he looked at them. Something in their eyes broke him. "Why are these heroes being sold like this?" he whispered. No one answered. But the dogs, they stared only at Daniel. They had spent their entire lives protecting humans. Yet today, no one was here to protect them. People whispered, some even laughed, calling them useless and too old to work. But Daniel felt something was wrong, terribly wrong. And then suddenly one dog barked. Not out of fear, out of desperation. A bark so sharp it sent chills down his spine. Within seconds, Daniel made a decision that shocked the entire auction house. "I'll take all of them." No one understood why, and no one expected what would happen next. Stay with us, because this story will leave you shocked. Before we start, make sure to hit like, share, and subscribe. And really, I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. The sun hung low over the dusty auction yard, casting long shadows across the wooden signs that read K9 Retirement Sale. Today, only. Most people walking past didn't even look twice. To them, it was just another auction. Another day. Another set of animals waiting to be sold. But to anyone who understood the world of law enforcement, this scene was heartbreaking. Rows of old metal cages stood side by side, their bars rusted from years of service and rain. Inside each cage lay a German Shepherd, a Belgian Malinois, and a few mixed canine breeds, dogs who had once worn badges, tracked criminals, sniffed out explosives, and risked their lives for people who would never even know their names. Now they sat quietly, their fur dull, their bodies tense, as if unsure why they had been brought here. Some stared blankly at the dirt floor. Others looked up every time footsteps approached, hoping for a familiar voice that would never return. Each dog carried its own story. Some had scars on their noses. Some had limped from old injuries. Some had cloudy eyes that hinted at years of danger. And yet, none of their past bravery mattered today. To the auction owners, they weren't heroes. They were retired assets, replaceable equipment no longer useful enough for the department. A crowd had gathered, buyers who only cared about obedience, strength, or whether a dog still had enough stamina to guard a warehouse. Conversations echoed through the air, casual and cold. "Looks old. Not much use left. This one's too slow. Maybe good for farm security, if the price is right." Every careless word weighed heavy on the dogs. Some flinched. Some let out low whimpers. But one German Shepherd in particular sat pressed against the corner of his cage, trembling. His eyes glistened, not just with fear, but with a kind of sadness no one expected to see in an animal. He wasn't aggressive. He wasn't barking. He wasn't trying to escape. He simply watched silently, as if begging someone to understand his pain. Beside him, a young boy tugged on his father's sleeve. "Dad, why are they crying?" The father looked away. "They're just dogs, son. Don't worry about it." But they weren't just dogs. Each one had once saved lives. Each one had a handler they trusted with everything. Each one had earned loyalty, respect, and a peaceful retirement. Instead, they were being sold to whoever bid the highest. A cold breeze swept through the yard, rustling the papers tacked to the wooden walls. Lists of dogs, ages, injuries, brief notes about their last assignments. The dogs shivered, their breath turning white in the chilly air. And somewhere far off, a truck engine rumbled, approaching slowly. Someone was coming. Someone who had no idea how this one visit would change everything. Officer Daniel Reed stepped out of his patrol truck, the gravel crunching beneath his boots as he surveyed the auction yard. He hadn't planned on being here today. In fact, he had been avoiding this place for weeks. But a message from an old colleague had changed everything. They're selling off the last unit today. If you care, go." Daniel wasn't sure what he expected, but the sight before him forced him to stop in his tracks. Rows of cages, aging police dogs, faces he recognized, not individually, but by the look in their eyes. The look all K-9 heroes shared after years of service. Loyalty mixed with exhaustion, discipline tied with silent pain. He inhaled deeply, trying to brace himself. He had come for one dog. Just one. A dog he'd heard about, rumored to be part of a unit Daniel had once trained alongside. A dog whose handler had retired and moved away, leaving the animal with no one to claim him. Daniel thought maybe, just maybe, he could give that one dog a home. But as he walked deeper into the yard, his chest tightened. The murmurs of the crowd blended with a sharp metallic scent of old cages. The dog stirred restlessly as he passed, ears twitching, bodies lifting, eyes following him with a mix of hope and fear. Daniel stopped beside the first row, gripping the cage bars gently. "Easy, buddy," he whispered to a limping Belgian Malinois. The dog lifted his head, tail barely twitching, as if recognizing kindness it hadn't felt in a long time. "Officer Reed," a voice called. Daniel turned to see the auction manager, a stout man with narrowed eyes. "Didn't expect someone like you to show up," he remarked, smirking slightly. "Most officers don't want retired dogs. Too much work, not enough reward." Daniel didn't respond. His gaze was already drifting to the farthest cage, where a German shepherd sat trembling, his eyes red and swollen, as if he had been crying. Daniel's heartbeat faltered. Something about the dog pulled him forward like a magnet. Behind him, a few buyers laughed casually. "Why'd the department send you? Looking for a guard dog? Or just curious how broken they really are?" Daniel ignored them. His attention was fixed on that one shepherd, the one who hadn't moved, hadn't barked, hadn't looked away. As Daniel stepped closer, the dog's ears lifted slightly. Its breath quickened. Its eyes locked onto his with a desperation that sent a shiver down Daniel's spine. He came here for one reason. But in that moment, standing face to face with a forgotten hero, everything inside him began to change. Daniel slowly approached the cage, his footsteps becoming quieter, almost cautious, as if he feared startling the trembling German shepherd inside. The closer he got, the heavier the air felt around him. Something about this dog was different. Not just sad, but shattered. The shepherd sat curled tightly in the corner, head lowered, ears drooping in defeat. His fur, once thick and proudly kept, looked dull from neglect. But it wasn't the worn fur or the tense body that struck Daniel. It was the dog's eyes. They were wet, glassy, and lined with streaks that looked like dried tears trailing down his cheeks. Daniel froze. He had seen fear in K-9 dogs before. He had seen aggression, pain, confusion. But never this. Never tears. The shepherd lifted his gaze slowly, as if gathering the courage to meet Daniel's eyes. When their eyes locked, something inside Daniel cracked open. The dog wasn't begging. He wasn't whining. He was simply staring, with a kind of silent plea that pierced deeper than any bark could. A lump formed in Daniel's throat. He knelt beside the cage, lowering himself to the dog's level. "Hey there, boy," he whispered gently. "It's okay. You're safe." The shepherd didn't move. Not even a twitch of his tail. Instead, a faint whimper escaped his throat, soft, broken, almost like a child trying not to cry. "Why is he like this?" Daniel asked quietly, turning toward the auction manager. The man shrugged. "That one's trouble. Doesn't eat much. Doesn't respond to commands. We think he's depressed." He was part of a specialized K-9 unit. His handler left the force, moved out of state. Dog hasn't been the same since. Daniel felt his chest tighten. Abandonment. Loss. A bond ripped apart. He looked back at the shepherd. "What's his name?" "Ghost," the manager replied. "Because he barely makes a sound anymore." Ghost. The name fit too well, too painfully well. Daniel reached his fingers through the cage bars. "Ghost, hey buddy, look at me." For a moment, Ghost stayed still, his breathing shallow and shaky. Then slowly, very slowly, he shifted his weight and inched forward, just enough for his nose to touch Daniel's hand. The contact was trembling, hesitant, fragile. But it was enough. A soft gasp escaped the crowd behind Daniel. Even the buyers fell silent. There was something sacred about the moment, an unspoken connection forming between a broken dog and a man who understood brokenness too well. Ghost pushed his nose harder against Daniel's hand, and then a tear slid down his face again. This time, Daniel saw it fall. His heart twisted painfully. "You've been waiting for someone," Daniel whispered. "Haven't you, boy?" The shepherd blinked slowly, pressing closer, as if answering yes. Suddenly, Ghost's ears perked, not fully, but enough to show a spark of recognition, a flicker of life. His body trembled again, though this time it wasn't only fear. It was hope. For the first time since arriving, Ghost lifted his head fully and leaned into Daniel's touch. And in that fragile moment, Daniel knew. This wasn't just a dog he wanted. This was a dog who needed him. Daniel stood up slowly, his hand still resting against the cold iron bars of Ghost's cage. The shepherd's trembling eased just a little, but the atmosphere around the auction yard shifted, not loudly, not visibly, just enough for Daniel to feel something wasn't right. He scanned the area again, this time not as a visitor, but as an officer. The buyers who had been casually chatting earlier now avoided his gaze. A few men standing near the back stiffened when Daniel looked their way. One of them, a tall man in a dusty jacket, nudged another with his elbow, whispering something under his breath. The second man shot Daniel a sharp, uneasy glance. Daniel narrowed his eyes. He stepped closer to Ghost's cage, noticing a tag hanging from the metal wire. Most dogs had detailed notes, training level, years served, injuries, certifications. But Ghost's card was almost blank. Name, Ghost. Age, 7. Status, retired. No service history. No unit listed. No medical notes. Nothing. That was impossible. Every K9 had a record, even basic information. A blank tag was either laziness or intentional. Daniel turned to the auction manager. "Why isn't anything listed for this dog? 7 years in service should come with files, injuries, deployments, all of it." The manager hesitated for a moment too long. Paperwork got lost. These dogs come from all over. Hard to keep track sometimes. Daniel's stare hardened. "You expect me to believe that?" Before the manager could answer, the tall man from earlier stepped forward. "Officer, if you're here to adopt, adopt. But don't start digging around. These dogs are old gear, nothing more." Old gear. Daniel clenched his jaw. Ghost let out a soft whine, sensing the tension. Another buyer laughed nervously. Some of these dogs weren't even supposed to be sold today. They rushed this auction. Something about paperwork deadlines. Paperwork deadlines. Lost files. Rushed sale. People acting nervous whenever Daniel asked a question. Every detail tightened the knot in his stomach. He took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "I want to see all the dogs' records," he said evenly. "Every one of them." The auction manager's face paled. "That won't be necessary." But it was. Because standing there, surrounded by silence, nervous glances, and trembling animals, Daniel knew one thing for certain. These dogs weren't just retired. Something was being hidden. Something big. Daniel stepped closer to Ghost's cage, ignoring the uneasy murmurs behind him. The shepherd had pressed himself against the bars again, his eyes following every movement Daniel made. Even the slightest motion caused Ghost's ears to twitch with fragile anticipation, as if he feared Daniel might disappear at any second. "Easy, boy. I'm right here," Daniel murmured. He knelt again, this time slower, gentler, placing both hands on the bars so Ghost could see he wasn't going anywhere. The shepherd shifted forward cautiously, inch by inch, like a dog who wanted to trust, but had been punished too many times for trying. A faint tremor ran through Ghost's legs. "You're terrified, aren't you?" Daniel whispered. Ghost lowered his head, but pushed his nose through the bars again, brushing Daniel's fingers. The touch was so soft, so desperate, it felt more like a plea than a gesture. Daniel's chest tightened. He had seen injured dogs before, scared dogs, confused dogs, but this level of silent fear could only come from betrayal. Behind him, footsteps scraped against gravel. Officer Reed, the manager said tightly. It's best if you pick a dog quickly. Others are waiting. Daniel didn't look up. I'm not leaving him. The tall man from earlier scoffed. That one's a waste of money. He's damaged emotionally and physically. Get a healthier dog. Ghost flinched at the raised voice, shrinking back into the corner. Daniel shot the man a sharp glare. Then why is he here? The man stiffened. Because he's retired, like the rest. Daniel leaned closer to the cage, lowering his voice to a soothing tone. Ghost, hey, buddy, look at me. Slowly, hesitantly, Ghost lifted his head again. The moment their eyes met, something shifted. Ghost's trembling eased, and he took one small step forward, then another, until finally, his face was pressed against Daniel's hand again, seeking comfort with heartbreaking vulnerability. That's it, Daniel whispered. Good boy, you're not alone anymore. Ghost exhaled shakily, as if releasing a breath he'd been holding for months. For the first time, his tail moved, not wagging, not fully lifted, but a tiny tap against the floor. A spark of life, faint, but real. Daniel rested his forehead against the bars for a moment, overwhelmed by the connection forming so naturally, so immediately. I'm going to get you out of here, he whispered. I promise. The manager cleared his throat. Sir, please step back. We have rules. Daniel finally rose to his feet, his expression firm. Then change them, he said quietly. Because I'm not walking away from this dog. Ghost watched him with wide, hopeful eyes, the kind of eyes that knew help had finally come. And Daniel knew. This wasn't a choice anymore. It was responsibility, destiny. As Daniel stood beside Ghost's cage, a familiar heaviness settled in his chest, one he had spent years trying to bury. The trembling dog, the fear in his eyes, the way he pressed against the bars, it all triggered a memory Daniel never wanted to relive. A memory of another shepherd, another partner, another loss. He closed his eyes, and the auction yard faded away. It had been 3 years earlier, on a cold winter morning. Daniel and his canine partner, Thor, had been chasing an armed suspect through an abandoned warehouse. Thor was fearless, loyal, disciplined, everything a police dog was trained to be. But he was more than that to Daniel. He was family. They moved through the shadows silently. Daniel remembered the echo of Thor's paws on the concrete floor, steady and controlled. But then, just as they reached a narrow corridor, Thor stopped abruptly. His ears shot up. His body stiffened. He sensed danger. Easy boy, Daniel whispered. But Thor didn't wait. He lunged forward, shoving Daniel back just as a hidden tripwire snapped. The explosion ripped through the hallway with a deafening boom. Daniel was thrown against the wall, his vision blurring, ears ringing. When he scrambled up, coughing through the smoke, he saw Thor lying on the floor, still, silent, broken. Thor, Daniel cried, crawling toward him. Thor lifted his head weakly, pressing his nose against Daniel's trembling hand. His breathing was shallow. His eyes, normally bright with determination, were fading. Even in those final seconds, Thor wasn't afraid. He was worried about Daniel. Daniel held him close, sobbing quietly as the world around them faded into sirens and shouts. Thor's tail tapped the floor one last time before his body went still. And just like that, his partner, his friend, was gone. The department honored Thor as a hero, but Daniel couldn't let go of the guilt. If he had been faster, more alert, more careful, Thor might still be alive. The kennel felt unbearably empty. The patrol car felt cold without the shepherd in the backseat. For months, Daniel refused to work with another canine. He couldn't. The bond he had lost had taken a piece of him with it. The flashback dissolved, and Daniel opened his eyes, staring at Ghost again. The shepherd sat quietly, breathing softly, watching Daniel with an expression that felt painfully familiar. The same trembling, the same fear, the same loneliness Thor had sensed in him after the explosion. Ghost wasn't just a dog who needed saving. He was a reminder, a chance to do for another forgotten hero what he couldn't do for his fallen partner. A chance to heal a wound he had carried for too long. A chance to give purpose to the pain he had never confronted. Daniel exhaled slowly. His decision was no longer influenced by sympathy. It was driven by something deeper, something unshakable. "I won't fail this one," he murmured under his breath. Ghost blinked softly, as if he understood. Daniel straightened, resolve solidifying inside him. This time, he wouldn't walk away. He wouldn't hesitate. He wouldn't lose another partner. Not again. Just as Daniel stepped closer to Ghost's cage again, the atmosphere around the auction shifted in a way he couldn't explain. It was subtle at first, a tension in the crowd, a hush in the buyer's conversations, a stiffness in the manager's posture. Daniel sensed it before he understood it. Something wasn't right. He leaned down to reassure Ghost again. "It's okay, buddy. I'm not leaving." But Ghost suddenly froze. His ears shot straight up. His body stiffened. His breathing halted. Daniel frowned. "Ghost." Then, without warning, Ghost barked. Not a scared bark. Not a cry for help. Not the trembling whimpers he had been making earlier. This was sharp, urgent, explosive. A canine alert bark, trained, controlled, unmistakable. Everyone nearby jumped. A few buyers stumbled back in shock. The manager shouted, "Hey, quiet that dog down." But Ghost didn't stop. He pressed his face against the bars, eyes locked on one specific man standing near the edge of the yard. The same tall man in the dusty jacket who had been watching Daniel earlier. Ghost's barking grew louder, more desperate, each bark echoing like a warning siren. Daniel immediately straightened. He knew that sound. He had trained with it, trusted it, depended on it. A canine didn't bark like that without reason. Ghost wasn't panicking. He was alerting. Daniel stepped toward the man, his voice low and controlled. "You. Step forward." The man stiffened. "What for?" "I didn't do anything." Ghost barked again, fiercer this time, slamming his weight against the cage door. The dog's fear had disappeared completely. Now he was focused, driven, acting with the confidence of a trained police canine. The crowd murmured anxiously. "What's going on? Why is he barking at that guy? Did he hide something?" Daniel's instinct sharpened. "Empty your pockets." "I said I didn't do anything," the man snapped, taking a step back. Ghost erupted again, his bark slicing through the tension like a blade. He wasn't guessing. He wasn't unsure. He was reacting the way only a well-trained canine reacts when they detect danger or guilt. Daniel's eyes narrowed. He took a small step closer. "Why is he alerting on you? These dogs don't bark for no reason." The man's face twitched. A bead of sweat slipped down his temple. The manager hurried forward, trying to block Daniel's view. "Officer, please, this is unnecessary. The dog is confused. Trauma. You know how it is." But Daniel shook his head slowly. No, Ghost wasn't confused. He was trying to warn him. Something, or someone, here was dangerous. And Ghost had just exposed the first clue. For a moment, the entire auction yard fell silent, except for Ghost's relentless barking. The shepherd's body pushed hard against the cage door, muscles trembling with urgency. His eyes stayed locked on the tall man, as if every instinct inside him screamed that this wasn't just a stranger. This was a threat. Daniel's pulse quickened. He glanced between Ghost and the man, his mind racing. Dogs suffering from trauma didn't react like this. Dogs afraid didn't focus on targets with this level of precision. This was a trained alert, and Ghost was trying to tell him something. Daniel took a careful step toward the man. "Why is the dog reacting to you?" The man scoffed, but his voice shook slightly. "Maybe he's crazy. These dogs are unstable. You said it yourself." "I never said that," Daniel replied coldly. Behind him, other dogs in the cages stirred, sensing the shift in Daniel's tone. Even the buyers took a cautious step back. Something dangerous crackled through the air, an unseen truth pressing to come out. The auction manager raised his hands nervously. "Officer Reed, let's keep this calm. These animals have issues. Trauma makes them unpredictable." Daniel's jaw tightened. Unpredictable? No. This is controlled. This is targeted. His voice dropped into the commanding tone he hadn't used in years, the tone of a canine handler who trusted his partner more than anything. Ghost barked again, slamming the cage with enough force to rattle the metal. His eyes flashed with urgency, not aggression. It was as if he remembered something tied to that man. Daniel turned fully toward the manager now. Why were these dogs rushed into auction? Why are their records missing? Why is this one reacting like he recognizes that man? The manager swallowed hard. Officer, you're overthinking. No, Daniel cut him off. I'm finally thinking clearly. Doubt faded from his chest, replaced with a steady, burning determination. Every instinct he had learned, every lesson he had earned, the years with Thor, the pain of losing a partner, all guided him to one truth. These dogs weren't retired. They were silenced. Someone wanted them gone fast. And Ghost, trembling but brave, was the only one trying to reveal why. Daniel stepped back toward Ghost's cage, placing a reassuring hand through the bars. I hear you, buddy, he whispered. I'm not ignoring this. Not again. Ghost pressed his head into Daniel's palm, whimpering softly. A vow formed in Daniel's heart. Whatever was happening here, he was going to uncover it, even if he had to stand alone. The auctioneer, a stocky man with a red face and a hat pulled low over his brow, rushed forward the moment he saw Daniel challenging the situation. His boots scraped sharply against the gravel, his voice rising with forced authority. Officer Reed, he said with an exaggerated smile that didn't reach his eyes, I think you're misunderstanding the situation. These dogs are harmless, old, retired, nothing more. Daniel didn't respond. He simply placed himself between Ghost's cage and the tall man Ghost had alerted on. The shepherd, now pressed fully against the bars, followed Daniel's every movement with sharp, alert eyes. The auctioneer stepped closer, lowering his voice. Let's not complicate things, sir. Pick your dog, pay, and leave. You're causing a scene, and this is a private sale. Daniel's gaze hardened. Private sale or not, canine dogs are government property until properly transferred with full documentation. And I haven't seen a single proper file yet. The auctioneer's jaw tightened. Paperwork is coming. It's just delayed. Convenient, Daniel muttered. The manager chimed in quickly, nervously twisting the papers in his hands. Officer, the crowd is getting unsettled. People came to buy, not to witness an interrogation. Let's keep the process moving. But Daniel wasn't fooled. Everyone here was nervous, too nervous. And every attempt to rush him only confirmed what his instincts already knew. The tall man tried to slip away through the crowd, but Daniel noticed. Stay where you are, he ordered. Ghost barked again, confirming Daniel's suspicion. The auctioneer stepped directly in front of Daniel, as if blocking his view. Look, officer, you're disrupting business. These dogs aren't your problem anymore. Their service is done. Their stories are finished. Daniel leaned in slightly, his voice low and ice-cold. That's where you're wrong. A canine story doesn't end just because someone decides they're no longer useful. The auctioneer hesitated just a flicker, but it was enough. If you want a dog, fine, he snapped finally. But you can only choose one. That's the rule. Daniel raised an eyebrow. One? Even if they're all being mistreated? Even if something illegal is happening here? Several people shifted uncomfortably. The tension thickened like fog. The auctioneer clenched his teeth. One dog. Choose. Now. Ghost whimpered behind the bars, sensing the pressure, sensing the urgency. The other dogs began pacing restlessly, whining softly as if they, too, feared what choosing just one might mean for the rest. Daniel looked around at the trembling animals, scarred, aging heroes waiting to be discarded, and then back at the men trying to silence him. A spark of defiance lit in his chest. Because if they thought pressure would make him back down, they didn't know him at all. The auction yard buzzed with uneasy whispers as Daniel stood motionless, his eyes scanning every trembling dog in every rustic cage. Ghost pressed his face against the bars, whimpering softly, sensing the tension rising around them. The other dogs paced restlessly, ears pinned back, their breaths sharp with fear. The auctioneer crossed his arms impatiently. Officer Reed, he snapped, choose one. Those are the rules. Daniel didn't respond immediately. His jaw tightened. His heart pounded with a familiar mix of anger and resolve. Every instinct in him screamed that something terrible was happening here. Something hidden beneath the rushed paperwork, the missing records, the nervous glances. And these dogs, these forgotten heroes, they were at the center of it. The crowd leaned in, waiting to see which dog Daniel would pick. But Daniel wasn't looking at just one. He was looking at all of them. Their scars, their trembling bodies, their silent cries for help. He took a slow breath, stepping forward. "You want my decision?" he said firmly. The auctioneer smirked. Finally, Daniel's voice cut through the yard like thunder. "I'll take all of them." The words slammed into the air. The entire crowd jolted. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Several buyers gasped. The tall man Ghost had alerted on went pale, his eyes widening with shock. "All of them," the auctioneer repeated, as if he had misheard. Daniel nodded once, unwavering. "Every single one." Ghost barked, a sharp, triumphant sound that echoed across the yard. For the first time, the dogs in the cages lifted their heads with hope instead of fear. The auctioneer sputtered, "You can't do that." Daniel stared him down. "Try and stop me." And in that moment, everyone understood. The rules had just changed. For a split second, the entire auction yard froze, silent, stunned, unable to process what Daniel had just declared. The wind shifted through the empty field, rustling loose papers across the dirt. Even the dogs fell quiet, sensing the sudden surge of tension. Then chaos erupted. The auctioneer slammed his clipboard against the table. "Absolutely not. You can't walk in here and take all the dogs. That's impossible." Daniel stood firm. "They're not equipment. They're living officers. And I'm not leaving them behind." Before the auctioneer could argue, the tall man Ghost had been barking and stepped forward, face twisted with anger. "Back off, officer. These dogs aren't your responsibility anymore." Daniel narrowed his eyes. "Funny how invested you are for someone who claimed not to care." The man flinched, just slightly, but enough for Daniel to catch it. Ghost sensed it too. He erupted into a fierce bark, his body slamming against the cage again. The other K9s joined in, a chorus of warning barks spreading through the yard like wildfire. Their instincts were awakened, alert, protective, focused on a danger only they recognized. The tall man cursed under his breath and reached for something inside his jacket. Daniel's training kicked in instantly. "Don't move." But the man kept going. Daniel lunged forward, grabbing the man's wrist before anything could be pulled out. The two struggled violently, stumbling against the crowded cages. Buyers screamed and scattered in every direction. Some tripped over crates, others hid behind vehicles. The auctioneer yelled, "Security! Stop him! Now!" But there was no security. There never had been. Daniel wrestled the man to the ground, forcing his arm behind his back. Something metallic clattered onto the gravel, a small device, concealed, suspicious, not something an ordinary buyer would carry. Ghost barked louder, as if confirming what Daniel feared. This man wasn't here to adopt. He was here to make sure these dogs disappeared. The auction manager rushed forward, pale as chalk. "Officer Reed, listen, we don't want trouble." "Too late," Daniel growled, pinning the man down. Why was he so desperate to stop me? "What are you hiding?" The manager stuttered, unable to form a coherent sentence. The tall man snarled up at Daniel. "You should have walked away. These dogs aren't your concern." Daniel tightened his grip. "They are now." Ghost whined behind the bars, scratching frantically, wanting to reach Daniel, wanting to protect him. The other dogs mirrored him, pacing, barking, crying out in fear and urgency. Chaos filled the yard. But through it all, one truth became painfully clear. This wasn't a simple auction. Something dark was happening behind the scenes. And Daniel's decision had just blown it wide open. The tall man lay pinned beneath Daniel, panting hard, gravel dust coating his jacket. The other buyers had backed far away, watching with wide, frightened eyes. Ghost was still barking fiercely behind the bars, his paws scraping the cage floor, desperate to reach Daniel. Daniel tightened his grip on the man's wrist. "What were you reaching for?" The man clenched his jaw. You don't know what you've stepped into. Then enlighten me. The man said nothing. Daniel grabbed the fallen metal object and held it up. It wasn't a phone. It wasn't a wallet. It was a small transmitter, military grade by the look of it. A device used for signaling, or detonating. A chill ran down Daniel's spine. He stood, dragging the man up with him. What were you planning to do with this? The man spat at the ground. Those dogs were never supposed to leave here. Behind them, Ghost let out another sharp bark. This one almost a cry of confirmation. Daniel looked around at the other trembling dogs, suddenly aware of how strangely quiet the yard had become. The auctioneer and manager both looked terrified, more terrified than the buyers. Daniel stepped toward the manager. Start talking. Now. The manager's voice shook. Officer Reed, we didn't have a choice. Daniel's tone dropped lower. What does that mean? The auctioneer wiped sweat from his forehead, avoiding Daniel's eyes. Some of these dogs, they were part of a shut-down task force. They worked cases no one wants to reopen. Their handlers retired or disappeared. The dogs know too much. Daniel stared at him in disbelief. They're dogs, not witnesses. You don't understand, the manager snapped, panic slipping into his voice. These dogs were trained to detect specific chemicals, routes, storage sites. Criminal groups don't want them transferred. They want them destroyed. Daniel felt a sickening weight settle in his stomach. Ghost barked again, loud, urgent, desperate. He wasn't just reacting to fear. He was warning Daniel. Warning him about the men who had been silently watching. Warning him about the plans made behind closed doors. The tall man sneered. Those animals were liabilities. We were cleaning up a mess. Daniel's anger surged. A mess? They served this country. They saved lives. Exactly, the man replied coldly. And that makes them dangerous. Daniel's fists tightened. Every dog in this yard had risked its life for people who now wanted them erased. The empty files. The rushed sale. The nervous glances. It all made terrible sense now. This wasn't retirement. This was disposal. Ghost whimpered softly, sinking down against the bars. His eyes met Daniel's, pleading, exhausted, heartbroken, as if he had been waiting for someone strong enough to finally see the truth. Daniel stepped back, turning to the auctioneer. You're going to let them kill these dogs. The auctioneer's silence was answer enough. Daniel exhaled sharply, rage and resolve intertwining. Not anymore. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling backup. This operation ends today. Ghost barked once, short, confident, relieved. For the first time since the chaos began, the dogs in the yard lifted their heads with a flicker of hope. Because someone was finally fighting for them. Daniel stepped back, phone pressed to his ear, adrenaline burning through his veins as he reported the situation. Requesting immediate units. Criminal activity tied to K9 disposal. Potential explosives. Send everyone. The dispatcher's voice crackled back. Units en route. Hold position. Hold position. As if it were that simple. The tall man struggled against the cuffs Daniel had slapped onto him, snarling through gritted teeth. You think backup will save you? You've already ruined everything. Daniel ignored him and rushed toward Ghost's cage. The shepherd was shaking, not from fear now, but from urgency. His eyes darted between Daniel and the other dogs, as if begging him to hurry. I know, buddy, Daniel whispered, fumbling with the lock. I'm getting you out. The lock finally snapped open. Ghost leaped forward, not wildly, but with controlled precision, the way a trained K9 moves when duty calls. He circled Daniel once, then bolted toward the next cage, barking sharply. You want me to free them too? Daniel asked. Ghost barked again, clear, confident, commanding. Daniel didn't hesitate. One by one, he tore open cages, old locks snapping under sheer force. The dogs emerged in varying states of fear and confusion. Some limped. Some crouched low. Others stood tall, protective instincts returning the moment they sensed freedom. The auctioneer stumbled back, horrified. You can't unleash all of them. They're dangerous. Daniel glared at him. They're heroes. And they're done being prisoners. A low growl rippled through the group of newly freed dogs, but not directed at Daniel, directed at the men who had been trying to erase them. The tall man paled as a half-dozen K9s locked eyes on him, recognizing a threat they had remembered far too well. Sirens wailed in the distance. Backup was coming fast. But trouble was coming faster. One of the buyers sprinted toward a truck parked near the fence. "We're not going down for this," he shouted. Ghost reacted immediately, launching himself in front of Daniel, barking fiercely at the escaping man. The other dogs formed a loose protective line, as if they understood the stakes. Daniel raised his voice. "Stay back. Police." But the man jumped into the truck, slamming the door shut. The engine roared. Gravel exploded behind the wheels. Daniel's heart pounded. "Everyone move." Ghost lunged forward, leading the charge, not out of aggression, but out of instinct to protect the handler he had chosen. The rescue had begun, and the fight was far from over. In the hours that followed the chaotic rescue, the abandoned warehouse-turned-auction yard slowly transformed into a crime scene swarming with officers, detectives, and animal welfare teams. The corrupt auctioneer and his partners were taken away in handcuffs, faces pale with defeat. But Daniel's focus wasn't on them anymore. His focus was on the dogs. The once trembling, broken K9s were now gathered behind a police barricade, surrounded by officers offering water, blankets, and gentle hands. Yet it was clear they didn't trust easily. They flinched at sudden movements, shrank when touched, stared at the ground as if expecting punishment. All except Ghost. Ghost stayed glued to Daniel's side, matching his every step with quiet, devoted precision. He didn't bark now. He didn't tremble. His posture had changed, still cautious, still fragile, but stronger. Hope flickered in his eyes like a flame rekindled after a long winter. Daniel knelt and scratched behind Ghost's ears. "You did good today," he whispered. "You saved them." Ghost pressed his forehead gently against Daniel's chest. It wasn't just affection, it was trust. A trust that had taken root the moment Daniel refused to walk away. Nearby, a female officer approached with a clipboard. "We'll take the dogs to the City K9 Rehabilitation Center," she said softly. "They'll get medical exams, behavioral assessments, therapy, everything they need." Daniel nodded, but Ghost's ears flattened. He nudged Daniel's hand anxiously, letting out a soft whine. "You want to stay with me, don't you?" Daniel murmured. Ghost licked Daniel's fingers, confirming it. The officer noticed. "It looks like he's chosen you." Daniel smiled faintly. "Feels that way." Over the next few days, something remarkable happened. The dogs, once terrified and withdrawn, began to transform under proper care. The Malinois with the limp wagged his tail again for the first time. A shepherd who had refused to eat finally accepted food from a kind handler. Two bonded dogs curled up together in a warm bed, sleeping peacefully instead of trembling through the night. And Ghost changed more than them all. He followed Daniel everywhere, training yard, office, patrol car. At first, Daniel thought Ghost needed him, but slowly it became clear. Daniel needed Ghost too. There was a steadiness in Ghost's presence, a silent reassurance that had been missing from Daniel's life since the day he lost Thor. When Daniel had nightmares, Ghost nudged him awake. When Daniel sat alone, Ghost rested his head on his knee. When Daniel felt the old grief creeping back, Ghost simply stayed with him. It wasn't just recovery. It was healing, mutual, profound, and unexpected. The forgotten heroes were rising again. And Ghost, once broken and abandoned, was becoming something he never believed he could be. Whole. Weeks passed, each day bringing new challenges, small victories, and quiet moments of healing. The rescued K9s were no longer shadows of their former selves. Their coats grew shinier, their eyes brighter, their steps steadier. The transformation was remarkable. So remarkable that local news stations began covering the story of the forgotten K9 heroes. But the heart of the story was Ghost. Ghost was no longer the trembling, broken dog Daniel had first seen in that rusted cage. He walked with purpose now, confident but gentle, protective but calm. He slept peacefully at Daniel's home, always choosing the spot closest to Daniel's bed. He followed commands with perfect discipline, not because he feared punishment, but because he trusted the man giving them. Daniel often sat on the porch with Ghost during quiet evenings, watching the sun sink behind the hills. In those moments, he felt something he hadn't felt in years: peace. One morning, Daniel received an unexpected call from the police chief. "Reed, come to headquarters. Bring Ghost." Daniel exchanged a curious look with Ghost. "Come on, buddy. Let's see what this is about." When they arrived, the entire hallway seemed to buzz with anticipation. Officers lined the corridor, smiling, nodding, whispering amongst themselves. Ghost walked beside Daniel proudly, head held high. Inside the briefing room, the chief waited with a small box in his hands. "Officer Reed," he began, "what you uncovered at that auction saved lives, human and canine. You exposed a criminal operation we didn't even know existed. Because of you, every one of those dogs is alive today." Daniel nodded humbly. "I just did what anyone would have done." "No," the chief said firmly. "You did what only someone with your heart would do." Ghost nudged Daniel's hand softly. The chief knelt and looked at Ghost. "And you're something special." He opened the small box and revealed a gleaming K9 badge. The room fell silent. Daniel's eyes widened. "Chief, are you serious?" "Ghost has passed every evaluation," the chief replied. "Behavioral, obedience, intelligence, protection response. It's rare for a retired dog to re-enter service, but this one isn't just recovering. He's thriving." He clipped the badge onto Ghost's new collar. "Congratulations, Ghost. You're officially reinstated as a K9 officer." A wave of emotion hit Daniel, so hard he had to swallow back a tight breath. Ghost looked up at him with bright, trusting eyes that held no fear now, only devotion. The room erupted in applause. But Ghost didn't react to the noise. He pressed his head against Daniel's leg, as if saying, "We did this together." Later that afternoon, Daniel took Ghost to the rehabilitation center to visit the other dogs. The moment Ghost entered, the room stirred. The dogs lifted their heads, tails wagging gently. It was as if they knew he had returned, not as a victim, but as a leader, a symbol of hope. Daniel watched them interact, pride swelling in his chest. These dogs, once discarded and nearly destroyed, were healing physically, emotionally, spiritually. A staff member approached him. "It's amazing," she said softly. "They all respond better when Ghost is around. It's like he gives them courage." Daniel smiled. That's because he learned how to find courage the hard way. As they walked out into the warm afternoon light, Ghost paused and looked up at Daniel, his tail swaying gently. "Ready for our next chapter?" Daniel asked. Ghost barked once, strong, confident, joyful. And Daniel knew, deep in his heart, that this wasn't just a second chance for Ghost. It was a second chance for him too. This story teaches us that true heroes are not defined by strength, age, or perfection, but by the sacrifices they make and the loyalty they give. The retired K9 dogs were forgotten by many, yet their value never disappeared. They simply needed someone to believe in them again. Officer Daniel's courage reminds us that standing up for the voiceless can change lives in powerful ways. Compassion, responsibility, and bravery can expose hidden wrongs and create new beginnings. Most importantly, it shows that healing happens when we choose kindness over convenience, and when we refuse to abandon those who once protected us.